Hello and welcome to the Majorly Undecided podcast. I'm your host, Kat Klaus. Before I introduce today's guest, I wanted to introduce you to a type of school that does a really good job in helping undecided students find their path. But that's not only what this type of school can do. The foundations of its curriculum are centered around the idea of exposing you to different subjects, thoughts, and ideas in order to teach you how to think through big problems. They famously don't teach you what to think. They teach you how to think. I'm talking about liberal arts schools. A liberal arts school has nothing to do with politics. Without going too much into history, and I do love the classics, I'm kind of a classics nerd. A liberal arts education is founded on the ancient Greek desire for a universal understanding. Originally, they were broken down into 7 subjects called the 7 liberal arts: rhetoric, logic, grammar, music, arithmetic, geometry, and astronomy. And if you're wondering, like I am, why arithmetic and geometry are broken up, geometry was more the study of shapes and calculating volume, etc. Today's liberal arts curriculum exposes students to a wide variety of subjects and encourages inquiry across the curriculum. It's usually based in sciences, humanities, social sciences, and the arts. At a liberal arts college, your class choices are endless, your class sizes are small, and your professors focus more on their students. Most classes are discussion-based, more Socratic method, and encourage you to think through bigger questions. If you're undecided, a liberal arts college is a great choice. They'll teach you skills that are universal across many different career fields. Your curriculum will allow you to explore a variety of interests to help you narrow down what path you want to take. You will be encouraged to explore, to question, and to think. Now, I admit fully I'm slightly biased because I went to a school that is a traditional liberal arts school. And I can tell you from personal experience, I learned so much from all of my classes, and I was encouraged to explore different areas, which is why I also majored in classics, because I had the opportunity to explore that whole area and really see how it could influence my major. My final project for classics was actually a screenplay that I wrote, which was a modern adaptation of an ancient Greek tragedy called Agamemnon. I can see now it was not the best script I've ever written, but I was able to combine both disciplines together, and it was encouraged that I do that. I also turned that script into a short film for my film production class in my communications major. And so somewhere in my closet, I have a copy of my really bad movie, which was an adaptation of Agamemnon. And we modernized it, and we did a lot of special effects and things like that. It was great. But back to the liberal arts colleges. If you're worried about being hired, right, because we're all thinking about getting hired after college graduation, a lot of companies are more likely to hire students with a liberal arts background. Now, in the past, some have turned up their noses at this type of education, citing that it doesn't prepare you to get a job after graduation. More and more companies are actually hiring graduates of liberal arts colleges as they have incredible critical thinking skills. They're more knowledgeable in subject matters other than their degree, and they have an ability to look beyond their specific task or idea and look at how it's influenced across the board. So in business, that's really important. Harvard Business Review actually discussed this in an article that I'll cite in the show notes that pushed back against the critics recently in 2019. That the college learning outcomes companies rate as most important are oral communication, critical thinking, ethical judgment, working effectively in teams, written communication, and the real-world application of skills and knowledge. All of these skills are taught in traditional liberal arts curriculums. If you're undecided, please consider exploring a few liberal arts colleges to see if they're a good fit for you. Like I said, the professors are very focused on their students, and they're teaching you how to think through big problems. Your critical thinking skills are vital to your career going forward and to becoming a good member of society. If you're looking to maybe, go into law school or any advanced degree, those critical thinking skills will serve you very well in graduate school. We're going to link a few liberal arts resources for you in the show notes. Explore, see if it's a good fit. Today's guest attended one such liberal arts college. He's the author of 2 books on teaching, The Secrets of Timeless Teachers and Full Classrooms, Empty Shelves. He's the graduate of Washington and Lee University and teaches political science at both Bakersfield High School and California State University, Bakersfield. He's the recipient of numerous teaching and writing honors, including the 2014 California Teacher of the Year Award from the Daughters of the American Revolution, was named 2012 Kern County Teacher of the Year, was a semifinalist in the 2013 for California Department of Education's Teacher of the Year program, and was a finalist in 2014 for the prestigious Carlston Family Foundational National Teacher Award. In California, the California State Senate recently sponsored a resolution in recognition of his achievements in education. He's a 2018 California State University Bakersfield Hall of Fame inductee. I'm excited to bring you today's interview with Jeremy Adams. Jeremy, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm really excited to hear more about your story, and you've had some amazing milestones in your career, so I'm excited to hear about those as well.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm honored to be on. Absolutely.
Can you tell us a little bit, starting out, how you were in high school, and did you know exactly what you wanted to be when you grew up?
Absolutely not. I had all this existential anxiety growing up because everybody seemed to have this arc of their lives. All these, they were in high school and then college was the next dot. And then the next, and they had all these dots. They seemed to know that these were the dots and I just needed to wake up every day and start to connect them. And I was never like that. I had 2 parents who were teachers, and I had a pretty picturesque childhood. I went to Franklin Elementary, grew up in Westchester, went to Emerson, went to Bakersfield High School. And I, as a young person, I feel like I'm a radically qualitatively different human being today than I was back then. All I knew is that I really loved tennis and I really wanted to make my parents proud. And I wasn't too wild. Nobody would ever write a screenplay based on my high school years. They were very G-rated, maybe PG at times. But I was a very conventional child, I'm sorry to say.
So there's a lot of anxiety around the college process, right? So how did you choose your major? Did you go in undecided? Did you pick a major randomly?
Well, it's interesting because I think most children carry the weight of their parents' dreams. And both of my parents came from pretty decent chunks of hardship. My mother was abandoned by her father when she never met him. She lived in the plains of Colorado and came to Lake Isabella in the 1950s to be a teacher. My father grew up in a shack in Oildale with an alcoholic father, and they had to move around a lot because he kept losing his job. And so my parents are both self-made human beings. They are my heroes. I'm a big believer that typically as human beings, we learn by example. And we are either improved or depraved by the exemplars in front of us. And so, really, my heroes are not presidents and dead people. They're not, famous people. They're my parents, right? They're my older brothers. I think I was still in my mother's womb when my father started talking to me about college. And it was always his dream to go to, this liberal arts college. And, they're more on the East Coast than on the West Coast. People often ask me, how did you end up at Washington and Lee University in Virginia from Bakersfield? And the simple answer is it was the best school I could get into that met my father's criteria. But something extraordinary happened my first year of college. And that is that this kind of covenant of life that I believed in, that education is expedient. It's about a means to an end. It's about this utilitarian, I have to know this to do well on a test, to get good grades, to get a good job, to make a lot of money. And that was really shattered my freshman year because I was exposed to these classical books, Plato and Aristotle, and then, the speeches of Abraham Lincoln, and then later on, the majesty of I think the greatest writer that ever lived is Leo Tolstoy. And I began to realize that, not just began to realize, I think it's maybe the most powerful idea I've ever encountered in 43 years of this walk of life, is that there are people who are actually dead, and they have been dead for hundreds or thousands of years, and yet they have something very vital and enthusiastic and powerful to say about my life today. And that I can read the thoughts of others to live a life that is better now. And their wisdom echoes through the ages. And that idea that, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you're an ancient Greek or Chinese or an Aztec or whatever, we're human beings, and our problems are 95% the same. We're born, we exist, we die, we have dreams, we don't meet them. Our relationships disappoint us. We never reach as high as we want to be. We say things we shouldn't say. Our bodies are falling apart. We don't know what we think about morality or God or love. And the fact that there's an entire body of this corpus of wisdom out there, and that I have access to it, I found that exhilarating. And I fell in love with learning. And I realized that the key to a good life is not having a lot, but knowing a lot and acting upon what you know. Does that make any sense?
100%. I mean, it's the whole reason I majored in classics, because I fell in love with the Greeks, and the fact that I could read, these Greek tragedies that said so much about life now, and there were mirrors in it, and then you see it in Shakespeare. I mean, that just it was like, it's kind of like a life guide of sorts.
Yeah.
Somebody's already been through this. I'm sure I can read about it and gain more about it. And then, you have these movements and stoicism and everything that's just trying to make sense of it all.
And it's exhilarating to know that C.S. Lewis had this great quote where he says, "I read to know that I'm not alone." I think when we're younger, you think that it's extraordinary to be special, but you don't really want to be special, right? Because then nobody else knows what it's like to be you. It's interesting that I have a friend who's just kind of discovered Stoicism, and he's reading Marcus Aurelius, and who wrote about life in the midst of all these battles from 161 AD all the way to 180, and he realizes that his words really echo and they reverberate through the ages, and then they can kind of be channeled in the year 2020 and make a difference in my life now. And so that joy that I discovered, I really wanted to be I wanted to channel that. And I wanted young people to understand that ideas are not just about regurgitation or sounding smart at a dinner party somewhere. Ideas are the prism through which you look at your own life and your world. And, it's interesting that you can read a book and the world is transformed around you. And then you realize it's not the world, it's you. You're different because of that learning. And it empowers and it impassions you to live, I think, a better, deeper, truer life. And that's what I fell in love with. I kind of started off in college, seeing it as a purely utilitarian exercise. And then by the end, I am an unapologetic educational romantic. Sorry. I don't apologize for it. And I think that learning and life are inextricably intertwined if you're trying to live a good life. And I think that college is about learning how to learn, by the way. I don't think it's just about acquiring a skill set that's useful from 9 to 5. What I learned when I read these books is I didn't just learn about how to be a teacher. I also learned how to be a human being, how to be a good father, how to be a good friend, how to be a good citizen, how to deal with loss. These are the things that really excited me.
In college, you're exposed to all these different viewpoints and people from all different backgrounds. And so you're learning together, and it's opening up your world a little bit more to understand where people are coming from and why they think the way they do.
Yeah. And you're right. I mean, especially when we go back to the Greeks, and I mean, isn't life a lot more exciting when it's a dialectic instead of just a speech, right? Life is so much richer when you're constantly engaging with others. And one of the things that really worries me today, especially as somebody who teaches civics and kind of the values, this kind of muscular democracy that we're supposed to have, is it's all predicated on the ability to have an informed and passionate conversation, right? Democracy is really just a passionate conversation amongst people trying to decide the direction they want to go in the cause of self-government. And if we don't know how to have conversation, then the future of democracy, it doesn't die because we're being taken over. It dies because we don't know how to form consensus and compromise and coalition building. And I think that's what education is supposed to be about. How do we learn how to have these conversations where, we're doing two things at the same time. On one hand, we're learning, we're taking in a different perspective, but on the other hand, we also have opinions that we're offering. And so there's that kind of delicate balance, that duality between, being and becoming, knowing and learning. And I think a lot of people nowadays just see conversations as a chance to convince somebody else they're wrong, right? And we never change.
It's about understanding somebody else's viewpoints and then sharing your own and then coming to the middle as to what is the right, because there isn't a right or wrong answer. There just isn't. That's not how life is. It's this one big, massive gray area. Yeah. And I think that's what the humanities do the best, is they expose you to, there's no right or wrong. It's not a math question. Right. There's this huge valley of gray.
And it's about kind of learning how to learn. And that's why, I always, as somebody who loves politics, it always bothers me when we play this gotcha about, well, hey, 30 years ago, you thought this. Well, I would not trust somebody who has the exact same worldview today than they had 30 years ago. And that's one of the things that I see a little bit sometimes with young people that I don't want to say it bothers me, but I do see a kind of an arrogance that, that we're not standing in the stream of history, we're somehow above it. And that we've reached kind of peak consciousness, that we see the truth of the human condition now. But 5 years ago or 50 years ago or 5,000 years ago, you guys are so flawed, you have nothing to teach us. And I do see a kind of arrogance of the moment that I wish, and I'm sure I had it when I was 18 or 19, and I'd read 3 books and knew everything under the sun. But I do think a little bit of epistemological humility is called for. The world is infinitely complex, that of all the things there are to know and all the books there are to read, you're only going to have a sliver of it. And so just know that, what's orthodox and conventional today is going to be old news tomorrow. And to just grow from that and accept that. And just to kind of be humble. And so sometimes, my students or my own children will kind of get after me. And I'll say, someday somebody's going to be pointing their finger at you and saying, you're not in line. So just understand we're in the stream of history. We're not above omniscient.
So tell us a little bit more about, that you went on this adventure, and you're still on this adventure of learning, and changing viewpoints and discovering more. How did you translate that over into teaching? Because when students think, and I know a lot of adults too, when they think of civics, when they think of history, they think of memorizing dates and things like that. How did you, and this is kind of a harder question, how do you bring that passion? How do you inspire others? And how did you feel about teaching the first couple years?
Well, okay, a lot to unpack there. I would say the first thing is, when I majored in political science, I had kind of this split soul. I had this one part of me that was who I was when I was growing up in high school, which is very ambitious. And, my parents instilled in me, you need to work hard. You have a lot of opportunities. You need to make the most of them. You have an obligation to do so. And so then I kind of had this notion, well, I'm going to go be a lawyer, or I'm going to go into politics, or I'm going to go be a journalist or something that is frankly kind of a kind of prestigious profession, right? Something that you'd wear a tie every day and you get dressed up and you have some kind of acclaim. But there was this other part of me that was kind of in its infancy of just loved learning and loved ideas, and kind of trying to figure out, what, the ancients always use this term. Since you're a classics person, I'll use the lingo of the ancients, this idea of the good life. And what does the good life consist in? And I was trying to get to the bottom of that. What does the good life look like? What does it mean for me? And so, this is, I'll tell you a story, and I've actually stopped telling the story to my students because I feel the eye rolls even when they're not doing it. But my senior year of college, these two parts of me were kind of at war with one another. And I started to read Leo Tolstoy's novella, The Death of Ivan Ilyich, which is the book that changed my life. And The Death of Ivan Ilyich is a story about a judge, and he was very successful and he had power. But, it was the kind of success that other people would look to and say, well, that's worldly success, right? I mean, he has power, people know his name, he has some money, he has some little bit of fame, but he kept his family at arm's length, and he kept his children at arm's length, and he did his job not because it was kind of idealistic, but because it was allowed him to use power. And so what happens is Ivan Ilyich gets sick one day, and he has to start thinking about his life for the first time. And he realizes, there's this great line at the end of the novella where he says he realized that he lived falsely. And there I was, 21 years old, reading about this fictional character. And I thought to myself, my God, if I keep on going the way I'm going to someday be lying on my deathbed and thinking that I lived falsely, that I didn't live the life that I wanted to live. I lived the life that, my culture, my parents, and my society said was the good life, not the one that I wanted to. And so my senior year of college, I tried to figure what's my next step, and had this ambitious self at war with this self that just loved learning and ideas. And I remember leaving my work study position. And I remember this sounds, I know this is where the eye roll comes from. But I remember it was a kind of a rainy day in Virginia in November. And I remember walking home from my work study, and I remember looking up in the clouds, and it was beautiful, and the clouds parted. Like when you see the sun kind of come through, you see the kind of the ray of light come down. And it was the very first time that it ever occurred to me to be a teacher. And I know students always think that's weird. How did it never occur to you? Very simply, because my parents were teachers, and I had to be better than they were. Right? And my parents did not want me to live a lateral life. They wanted me to stand on their shoulders and do more than they did. That is what every parent wants, is for their child to stand on their shoulders, to see and do what the parent could not do for themselves. That's our dream. Right? And we live vicariously through the hopes of our children. And so it never occurred to me to do what my dad did. It would break his heart if I just simply did what he did. That's not what my life had been designed for. But then it occurred to me that this is who you are. This is how you're going to live a meaningful life. This is what you're supposed to be doing. And it was about the closest thing to a burning bush or a voice booming out of the sky that I could ever say that I experienced in my life. But there's not a day that goes by that I regret that decision.
So you made that decision. You started teaching, but now you've branched out a little bit more. So you didn't really stay lateral. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I have this bad habit. I never put things off of my plate. I just keep putting more and more things on my plate, which is a really, a bad habit at times. But I taught at BHS for about 8 or 9 years. And then the wonderful people in the political science office at CSUB needed an adjunct, and it went really well. And I've now been at CSUB for 13 years. So I also teach college, which is wonderful. But the writing is something that really shocked people. When my first book came out in 2012, all of my students were absolutely shocked by it because they didn't know that I had this ambition to have a writing career as well as a teaching career. And the reason they didn't know that was because I had failed 100% of the time. I'd failed miserably. I wrote articles, I wrote stories, I wrote books, I wrote everything. And I was rejected by every journal, every agent, every publisher, every newspaper. I was getting nowhere. I know nowadays there's this cult of failure there. You just have to put in, you got to grind, you got to fail. And I wish I could add to that other than to say, it's true, but it's true. All those years of abject, up at dawn, pride swallowing sieges of failure, they happened for a long, 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 long time. But then around 2012, I had my first memoir published, and that kind of got me on the road to a kind of a slightly bigger publisher. And then just in April, I published with my newest book, Riding the Wave, is with probably one of the most prestigious educational publishers in the country. I've been published in the last few years in the LA Times, in the Washington Post, in the Huffington Post. I've had a number of articles kind of go viral a little bit. And I'm actually right now writing a book for one of the largest publishers in America, which is more a book of commentary, which is a very different kind of book. It's not an education book or a pedagogical book. And so I know it kind of looks like it kind of happened really fast for me. The amount of it's still, I still have to pinch myself that I was in the LA Times on Tuesday. I've probably been in the LA Times 24 times in the last 10 years and got nowhere. So it's kind of like, somebody once said to Picasso I'm not comparing myself to Picasso, but he was leaving a cafe once, and somebody said, "Would you draw something, please?" And so he drew something really fast on a napkin, handed it back, and said, "Oh, that'll be some ridiculous amount of money." And the person's like, "What do you mean? It took you 30 seconds to draw that." And he looked at them and he said, "It didn't take me 30 seconds to draw that. That took me 50 years to be able to draw that." And so, whatever writing success I'm enjoying now, and I'm very, very thankful for it, it took me 20 years of real failure to get here. But the reason I do it is because I know the power that words and articles and books and novels have in my own life. And if I can play just a microscopic version of that in somebody else's life, because words and ideas can change the world. If I can harness that power, that lyricism, the poignancy of language to help somebody else live a better life in some way, then that makes my life meaningful. And I want to have a part to play in that.
So I'm gonna ask you a little bit more about the skills that you've gained along the way and what you've kind of been surprised by. Because with teaching, there's and learning in general, you have to be flexible. Things change. Your viewpoints change.
Yes.
What are the most important skills you think that you've utilized? And then what are some skills that have surprised you that you utilize?
I think the one thing that is really the most handy thing for me is I do feel like I'm a pretty good communicator. I do like to be with people. I consider myself to be social. When I'm in the classroom, I do feel like I'm a little bit of a performer. I do like to make the kids have a response. It does bother me when they sit there and they look bored and they look indifferent and they look sour. I do take that a little bit personally, and that's one of my flaws as a teacher. But I think it also motivates me to try and have maximum impact. Like, I want to try and connect to all students. You asked about, what's changed. I think early on I was convinced, you're going to be, I think we've all had 2 or 3 teachers that radically changed our lives. And, I think when I was 22 years old and naive and full of total hubris, there's another Greek, problem, hubris. I was going to be everybody's favorite teacher. I was going to be the teacher that made the difference to everybody. And I think that I've had to kind of assume a posture of humility and learn that what I have to offer is not what everybody wants. It's not what everybody likes. It's really hard for me. One of the things I've had to learn to do is to accept that some people just aren't going to like you. Some people aren't going to like your class. They're going to, you can. One of the things that's really illuminating is those SOSIs at CSUB. Where you'll have 60 kids respond. And I remember my buddy, one of my mentors, Michael Flockman, he did the same thing. He said, I will get 59 positive reviews, right? And they're all great and they're glowing. And you'll get that one and you just destroy your soul. Like, what did I do wrong? Do I need to radically reformulate everything? And I've just kind of had to accept that you're not going to have the impact you want to have with everybody. And you have to learn to accept that. Now, what I don't apologize for, and what I wish more teachers did do, is I don't apologize for the fact that I do care what my students think, right? I want them to enjoy the class. I want them to feel like it's challenging. I want them to want to come to class. I want them to tell me if I can be better. I say all the time, another thing that you asked about surprises is, I thought that all the great ideas I ever had for education to be a better teacher would come from my colleagues, and they would come from, books of pedagogy and thinkers in the field and cutting edge ideas. No, the best ideas I've ever had how to be a better teacher come from my students who say, Mr. Adams, here's what we want from you. Here's what can make us learn better. And so that is something I've really learned. And of course, just what's really shocked me is just the way that the role of school has changed. When I was growing up, when we were growing up, I think you're probably a bit younger than me, but when we were growing up, school was about education. And that's it. You went to school to be educated. And that's there, but it's also now there for emotional support. It's there for counseling. It's there to deal with lunch and dinner and breakfast. Essentially, schools have become backstops for every failure of modern civil society. And, my students need a lot more from me than just a fancy, lively presentation of skill set, right? And the thing that's shocked me is just sometimes the journey that students come to the classroom with. When I was growing up, I think most of the time I took it for granted that we came to the classroom and that we wanted to learn, and whether or not it was for, I just want an A or because I truly cared, we wanted to learn. And I don't take that for granted anymore. I think I've had to really learn to understand that a lot of kids come into the classroom and they have hurdles and they have all kinds of strife that I had no comprehension of 20, 25 years ago. And I think that's made me more empathetic. But that's also kind of I'll tell you, Kat, I think that's also a difficult duality because you want to be empathetic and you want to be understanding, but I also think you do nobody any good by simply saying, well, so therefore I understand you can't succeed. I don't believe that. I've seen the magic of education in America too much not to be a believer in it. In fact, a lot of these young people, they understand that the one door they have to kind of live a better life is to make the most of their education. And I see it with dozens and dozens and dozens of students a year who maybe our society hasn't given them much, but it has given them the chance for an education. And by God, they're going to make the most of it. And they do. And they kind of transcend what you might expect of them. And that's magical. And to be a part of that is really exciting. But I think it's taken me some learning about the background so many of my kids come from and to try and empathize with it and understand it. It makes me a better teacher.
Well, there is a component, there's a skill to that, to understanding, but then also it inspires you almost. You don't naturally, any job, you're going to have the monotony of, I don't really want to go in today. It's Monday, but in the bigger picture, knowing that you're helping someone get that step up, standing on your shoulders, or you're that one person that believes that they can succeed. Yes. And that goes so far.
Yeah. And that's so well said, because I think that, it takes two things. You have to understand your students, understand where they're coming from, but that's not enough, right? You can't replace understanding with also inspiring them and motivating them and kind of hoping for a kind of a set of behaviors and skills that will really benefit them. I mean, it's nice to be empathetic and it's nice to understand your students. And I think you have to, frankly. And I think younger teachers are really good at that. I think they've really inspired me. You need to really learn how to understand that. But then you have to pivot, and you also have to say, okay, now that I understand where you're coming from, I can better teach you and inspire you and push you to do what needs to be done so that you can live a good life. And you are right, by the way. You never know when a teacher is going to say something or do something or have a lesson or a conversation that resonates with a student. And by the way, I mean, I've had so many conversations with former students who will come back and say, I remember that lesson or that conversation, or you said that. And I have absolutely no memory of what it is we're talking about. And that's kind of a reminder to me as a teacher that, you got to be careful. Like you said, yeah, it's Monday. I'm tired. I'm not into this. But you don't know. We don't get to control what our students remember about it. We don't. And, sometimes, we have bad days and we lose our patience, or we say things we shouldn't say. And kind of accepting that sometimes those kids are going to remember that too. And you're not perfect. I mean, sometimes I'll see students who I had my first year teaching and they're like 35 years old, and I'll see them out and about, and I'll put my head down and walk the other way, because goodness knows, God only knows what kind of a teacher I was in the first few years of my career. I was probably pretty out there, and probably way too opinionated, and not. I feel like I'm an infinitely better teacher today. I hope so.
Can I ask you, what is the biggest mistake that you see a lot of students make when they're thinking about who they are and how they can translate that to their future career?
Yeah, I think that the biggest problem is short-term thinking. And I think that one of the things that's going to happen in our lifetimes is that we're going to radically reformulate the different phases of life. Right now, you have your early childhood, and then you're done with being a child at 18, and then you go to college and you get a job, you work hard for 40 years, and then you retire for 20, and that's it. And I think that's entirely going to be destroyed. I think most of my students are going to live to over 100 years old now. I think people are going to be working much longer. I think we're going to be much healthier. And I think that's good for the liberal arts, by the way. I think that's this idea that we're not going to college and going to school just for the first job I ever get. Or to phrase it another way, you're not just getting an education so that you can be productive from 9 to 5 every day, right? And I think the mistake we make is that we major in things, and we essentially study things that we only look at through the lens of being very useful, right? This utilitarianism that I think is almost tyrannical, that, you go to college to get a degree, to get a good job. And I think that's fine. I mean, that's fine. That's true. I mean, you're looking at somebody who majored in political science and teaches political science, right? So clearly I use my major every single day. I'm not bemoaning that, but I do think that you have to have a dexterity about you that says, I want my education to not just be about what I know and about my skills, but does it also impart a certain kind of disposition about learning? I mean, that's the thing that I would tell you, is that a great education doesn't teach you things. Learning teaches you how to learn more, right? You go to college to learn how to learn. And that's because you don't know what life is going to throw at you. You know, I never imagined I would be teaching college. I never imagined when I was 19 that I would be, giving a lot of speeches or doing podcasts or, frankly, raising 3 children and having a wife who works 60 hours a week. There are skills there that, believe it or not, you learn and you value. And I think that's the problem, is a bunch of short-term calculus in the way that we look at learning, and we're just much too utilitarian, utilitarian.
Well, we're seeing a little bit of a shift, especially with the pandemic, in the creativity that's coming out of everyone, and people learning new things and having a little bit of space to do that. And I know that there's a little bit of talk about universal basic income and things like that to facilitate that. That's a whole political discussion, but it's interesting to kind of see. Right now we're living history. I don't know if I want to be living this timeline of history, but we're living this timeline of history. And so it's interesting to see echoes, but then also seeing that change come, and, the change in the way that people are thinking about learning and what they do with their free time and things. That's just my commentary on it. What advice do you have for students who are looking to, who are really inspired by learning, who might be thinking about teaching? What advice do you have for those students?
I would say kind of the most important advice, and I would also kind of qualify this by saying, most of your guests probably have like different phases of their career, right? They like do 2 or 3 different things. I do the same thing today than I did when I was 22 years old. And so, the last day of my career will probably look very similar to the first day of my career. I started in August of 1998, and I'm going to finish in probably June of 2038. And so I don't know if I'm necessarily the best person to talk to about that. But what I would say is that always be on the lookout for different opportunities for professional growth. And that always try to say yes to things, even if it's beyond what's comfort for you, right? So we all have a comfort zone. And I think saying yes when it's easier to say no, I think is a really important thing. And I also think that it's really important early on to kind of contextualize what you do in your job. I mean, it's very easy to say, well, I'm just teaching about Brown versus the Board of Education today. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you can take a step back and say, well, I'm also teaching about American political values, and I'm teaching about the Supreme Court, and I'm teaching about progress. And so if you kind of learn to contextualize what you do and put it in a broader scope of things, I think it'll inspire you to understand that, that there are different ladders of meaning that you're climbing throughout your life. And that's, it's really important to do that. I mean, I don't know if you've ever heard this famous story where there's a guy and he's going by this field, and there are 3 people who are dragging stones. And he goes to the first person and he says, well, what are you doing? He says, I'm dragging stones. He goes to the second person. He says, well, what are you doing? And he says, well, I'm just making a living, man. I'm just making a living. He finally looks to the third person who actually has a smile on their face, unlike the other 2. He says, what are you doing? And he says, well, I'm building a cathedral. That's what I'm doing. And I would say that remember that you can build a cathedral even if it feels like you're just dragging stones every day, no matter what it is you do for life. That's
great advice. Especially the first couple years of any new job, or that entry level position where you're, a lot of students think that they're just going to walk into the vice president position or something. There's a lot of, you're going to feel like you're dragging stones. And then.
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah. The cathedral comes later, but the dragging of the stones is the necessary part. I mean, and that's why, that's why I really try and be very thankful on kind of the writing portion of my career right now. Is I try and, whenever I get frustrated with the writing, if I write something that doesn't do well or doesn't get a good response or whatever, I try and kind of tell myself, Jeremy, if the 33-year-old version of you could see where you are at 43, you wouldn't believe it, and you'd be very thankful for that. And again, I think it's really important for people to learn how to take a step back and kind of take a global sense of what it is they're doing. And if you feel like there's purpose and promise, then that's the passion of whatever it is you're pursuing in your life. And I would also say, try to, try to understand that what you're going to want at 22 is not what you're necessarily going to want at 32 or 42 or 52. Ralph Waldo Emerson has that wonderful essay called Circles, where he says, that essentially, our lives are like circles. And as we grow and we read and we learn and we do more, kind of our souls get bigger, right? You have bigger circles that surround you. And I would just tell people, don't predict where your circle is going to go. Just do the work to make sure that it gets bigger every day.
It's great advice. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I know that our listeners learned a whole bunch.
That's way too fast. Thank you.
All right, Jerry, thank you so much. I thought it went great. Is there anything else that I didn't ask that you think that we should add?
No, I'm honored that you asked me, and anything I can ever do, please let me know. I think this is wonderful. And I think it's an important message to young people to really embrace the unknown, to embrace it, because at the end of the day, it really is about growth. And again, that's what I didn't understand when I was a young person is just how different I'm going to be. And I've kind of learned to embrace wherever life takes me and to try and kind of learn lessons from wherever it is I'm coming, success or failure. And so I think it's a wonderful thing that you're doing, and I hope people listen.
Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed today's interview. I want to thank Jeremy for sharing his wisdom, advice, and his story. If you have a question or topic you'd like to see featured on the podcast, don't hesitate to email us at info@majorlyundecided.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, and our Facebook and Instagram page is Majorly Undecided. As always, you can find more resources, including our free quick guide to deciding your major on our new and improved website, majorlyundecided.com. Thank you, and we'll see you on the next episode.